She walked into that Christmas party thinking it was just another holiday gathering. She had no idea she was walking straight into an ambush. Red wine, a packed ballroom, 200 witnesses with their cameras ready, and the three people who wanted to destroy her. They'd planned everything down to the last detail. But here's what they didn't know, what none of them knew: the pregnant woman they were about to humiliate in front of the entire elite society. Her father wasn't just some broke businessman who disappeared 8 years ago. He was standing on that balcony, watching, waiting, and he owned everything, including the mansion they were standing in. This is the story of how one woman lost everything in a single week. Her job, her home, her dignity, almost her baby, and how she rose from the ashes to make every single person who hurt her pay the price they deserved. If you believe karma is real, you're going to love where this story goes. Drop a comment and tell me, Team Eleanor or Team Revenge? And hit that subscribe button, because justice this satisfying deserves to be shared. Now let's go back to where it all began. 72 hours before the party that changed everything. Red wine arced through the air in slow motion, crystalline drops catching the light of 1,000 chandeliers. Eleanor Madison Hart's hand moved instinctively to protect her swollen belly as the liquid exploded across her face. Warm wetness soaked through her light blue maternity dress, staining the fabric a deep crimson that looked disturbingly like blood. 200 guests gasped in unison. Camera phones rose like a forest of glowing lights. Flash after flash captured Eleanor's devastated expression, tears mixing with wine, streaming down her cheeks in thin red rivers. The woman in the blood-red gown smiled with satisfaction. The older woman beside her covered her mouth in mock horror. And Eleanor's husband? He stood there watching, his face cold with disgust, making no move to help his pregnant wife. Then a voice rang out from the balcony above. Deep, commanding, furious. Touch my daughter again, and you'll learn what it means to lose everything. Every head turned. The music stopped mid-note. The entire ballroom held its breath as a distinguished man in an expensive suit began descending the grand staircase, each footstep echoing like a judge's gavel. Eleanor squinted through her tears at the approaching figure. Something about him seemed familiar, but it couldn't be. It was impossible. Dad, she whispered. But that was getting ahead of the story. To understand how Eleanor Madison Hart ended up humiliated at a Christmas gala, we need to go back 72 hours earlier. Eleanor stood in the cramped nursery of her small apartment, carefully painting woodland animals on the wall. Her 7-month pregnant belly made the work difficult, but she refused to hire anyone. Money was too tight. It had always been too tight. Your daddy's just busy, sweetheart, she murmured to her unborn child, one hand resting on her stomach. He'll come around. He has to. Her phone buzzed on the paint-splattered drop cloth. A text from Victor. Working late again. Don't wait up. Eleanor's face fell. She'd heard those words at least 100 times in the past 6 months. The apartment felt suddenly smaller, the walls closing in. She set down her paintbrush and lowered herself carefully onto the old futon that served as both couch and guest bed. This wasn't how marriage was supposed to feel. This wasn't the life Victor had promised when he'd swept her off her feet 3 years ago. Eleanor picked up her phone and scrolled through their text history. The messages grew progressively shorter, colder. Where Victor once sent paragraphs about his day and asked about hers, now she received one-word responses, or worse, nothing at all. She opened her photo gallery, looking for proof that her marriage had once been real. There, a picture from their wedding day. Victor in his tailored tuxedo, Eleanor in her simple white dress from a consignment shop. Both of them smiling, both of them happy. Or had they been? Looking at the photo now, Eleanor noticed something she'd missed before. Victor's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. His hand on her waist seemed more possessive than affectionate. A sharp kick from her belly pulled Eleanor from her thoughts. She rubbed the spot gently. I know, baby, I know. Mama's sad, but it'll be okay. It has to be okay. But as Eleanor looked around her cramped apartment, the peeling paint, the second-hand furniture, the clearance rack, baby clothes folded in a laundry basket, she wondered if she was lying to her child. Her phone buzzed again. Not Victor this time. Katie Sullivan, her best friend since college. Coffee tomorrow? You sound sad in your texts, and I'm worried about you. Eleanor typed back quickly. I'm fine, just tired. Pregnancy stuff. The three dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. Katie was typing, deleting, typing again. Finally, a message came through. Liar. I'm picking you up at 10. No arguments. Despite everything, Eleanor smiled. Katie always knew when she was pretending. The next morning, Eleanor sat across from Katie at their favorite coffee shop, a tiny place 3 blocks from Eleanor's apartment that still made drinks she could afford. Katie pushed a blueberry muffin across the table with a look that said, eat or else. You've lost weight, Katie said bluntly. She was a nurse in the emergency room and had no patience for sugarcoating. You're 7 months pregnant and you've lost weight. That's not okay, Elle. Eleanor picked at the muffin. I've been nauseous. You've been stressed. Katie leaned forward, her green eyes sharp with concern. Talk to me. What's Victor doing? Nothing. He's just working a lot. Eleanor Madison Hart, I have known you for 10 years. I can tell when you're lying. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She hated crying in public, but lately it seemed like she cried everywhere. I think he's having an affair. The words hung in the air between them. Saying them out loud made them real in a way they hadn't been when they lived only in Eleanor's head. Katie's jaw tightened. What makes you think that? Everything. He's never home. When he is home, he barely looks at me. I found a receipt in his jacket pocket, $800 at Cartier. Katie, I wear $40 jewelry from Target. That gift wasn't for me. Have you asked him directly? Eleanor nodded miserably. Last week, he said I was being hormonal and paranoid. He said, her voice broke. He said marrying me was supposed to be for better or worse, but this, Eleanor gestured at her pregnant body, this was definitely worse. He did not. Katie's voice went cold in a way that would have terrified anyone who knew her temper. Please tell me he did not say that to you. Word for word, Eleanor wiped her eyes with a napkin, and his mother keeps coming by unannounced. She looks at my apartment like it's infested with rats. Last time she picked up the baby clothes I bought and asked if they were from Walmart. When I said yes, she said a Hale baby shouldn't wear discount clothing. The Hales can go straight to... Katie, I'm serious, Elle. You deserve so much better than this. You've always deserved better. Katie grabbed Eleanor's hand across the table. Why did Victor marry you? Did you ever really think about that? Eleanor had thought about it. Late at night when Victor wasn't home, when the apartment was too quiet and her thoughts too loud, she'd wondered. But she'd always pushed the question away because the answer terrified her. Before Eleanor could respond, her phone buzzed. She picked it up and stared at the screen. What is it? Katie asked. An invitation to a Christmas gala at Frostfall Estate. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she held the phone. Victor says I have to come. He needs me there for appearances. Katie's expression darkened. Babe, this feels like a setup. That family hates you. It's Christmas, Eleanor said softly, though she didn't quite believe it herself. Maybe Patricia will soften. Maybe Victor will remember why he married me. Maybe if he sees me dressed up, looking nice. You look beautiful all the time. If he doesn't see that, he's an idiot. Katie squeezed Eleanor's hand harder. Promise me you will be careful. Something about this doesn't feel right. Eleanor wanted to promise. She wanted to tell Katie she'd stay home, that she'd protect herself and her baby. But she thought about Victor's cold eyes when he'd told her she was making a scene. She thought about his threat that his lawyers would destroy her in any custody battle. I have to go, Eleanor whispered. If I don't, it'll be worse. Katie's face fell. They both knew Eleanor was trapped. No money, no job prospects. She'd been forced into early leave from her elementary teaching position. No family support. Just a husband who treated her like an inconvenience and a mother-in-law who treated her like garbage. Then I'm helping you get ready, Katie declared. We're going to make you look so stunning that everyone in that mansion will wonder what Victor Hale did to deserve you. Which, for the record, is absolutely nothing. Eleanor tried to smile, but inside a terrible sense of dread was building. Katie was right. Something about this invitation felt wrong. But she had no choice except to walk directly into whatever trap was waiting for her at Frostfall Estate. She just didn't know yet how bad it would be, or that the wine attack would be only the beginning of the worst week of her life. That evening, alone in her apartment after Katie had gone home, Eleanor stood in front of her bathroom mirror. The woman staring back at her looked exhausted. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her blonde hair, once thick and shiny, had become dull during pregnancy. Her skin was pale from too many days spent inside, too many nights crying. She placed both hands on her belly. "I'm trying, baby. I'm trying so hard to make this work for you. Every child deserves a father. Every child deserves a family." But even as Eleanor said the words, she thought about her own father. James Hart had disappeared 8 years ago, and she'd spent every day since wondering if she'd done something wrong, if she'd been a bad daughter, if he'd left because she wasn't worth staying for. Now here she was, 28 years old and pregnant, feeling abandoned all over again, this time by a husband instead of a father. Eleanor opened the medicine cabinet and pulled out the bottle of sleeping pills her doctor had prescribed months ago when the anxiety first started. She'd barely used them. They made her groggy and she worried about the baby. But tonight, with the Christmas gala looming in 2 days, her mind wouldn't stop racing. She opened the bottle and counted. 30 pills. Enough to make everything stop if she wanted it to. The thought appeared unbidden, and Eleanor gasped, dropping the bottle. Pills scattered across the bathroom floor. What was she thinking? She was pregnant. She had a baby depending on her. No matter how bad things got, she wouldn't. Eleanor dropped to her knees, carefully picking up each pill with shaking hands. Tears streamed down her face. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. Mama's just tired. I promise I would never." She put the pills back in the bottle, closed it tight, and shoved it to the very back of the cabinet. Then she sat on the cold bathroom floor and sobbed until she had nothing left. Tomorrow she'd have to start preparing for the gala. She'd have to find something to wear that would hide how much weight she'd lost. She'd have to practice smiling so Victor wouldn't be embarrassed by her sad face. She'd have to pretend everything was fine. But tonight, just for tonight, Eleanor let herself fall apart in the privacy of her tiny bathroom, where no one could see how close to breaking she really was. Outside her window, snow began to fall. In 2 days, that snow would blanket Frostfall Estate, turning it into a winter wonderland. And Eleanor's life would shatter into pieces so small, she'd wonder if they could ever be put back together. 8 years earlier, Eleanor Hart was 20 years old and in her junior year at a mid-tier state college, studying art education. She'd never been wealthy, but her father, James Hart, had made enough in real estate development to pay her tuition without loans. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, safe, good. That changed on a Tuesday in November. Eleanor was in her dorm room painting a still life for her advanced techniques class when her phone rang. "Dad." She answered with paint-stained fingers, expecting their usual weekly check-in. "Hey, Dad, you won't believe the grade I got on my—" "Eleanor, sweetheart." His voice sounded wrong, strained, old. "Something's happened." Eleanor set down her brush, her heart rate accelerating. "What's wrong? Are you okay? Is it your heart again?" "No, nothing like that. It's—" A long pause. "Business partners framed me, Eleanor, for embezzlement. They forged documents, fabricated evidence. I lost everything today. The company, the properties, the savings, everything." Eleanor's legs went weak. She sat down hard on her bed. "But you didn't do it. You can fight this. Get a lawyer. We'll prove—" "The lawyers say it'll take years and cost millions I don't have." James's voice cracked in a way Eleanor had never heard before. Her father was the strongest man she knew. Hearing him break apart over the phone felt like watching a building collapse. "I can't let you see me like this, Eleanor. I can't watch you lose respect for your father." "Dad, no, I don't care about money. Just come home. We'll figure it out together." "I love you, sweetheart. I always have. I always will. Remember that." "Dad, wait." The line went dead. Eleanor called back immediately. The number was disconnected. She called his office. A recorded message said the business was closed pending investigation. She called his apartment. No answer. For 3 days, Eleanor frantically searched for her father. She filed a missing persons report. She called every contact in his phone that she could remember. She even hired a student from her school who claimed to be good at finding people online. Nothing. James Hart had disappeared completely. On the fourth day, Eleanor received an automated email notification. $500 had been deposited in her checking account from an estate disbursement. The same thing happened the next month, and the month after that. Small amounts, never enough to live comfortably, but enough to survive. Eleanor assumed these were the last remnants of her father's failed business. Liquidating slowly, she never suspected the truth, that James Hart was alive and sending every dollar he could scrape together to keep his daughter afloat. The aftermath was brutal. Eleanor dropped out of college. She couldn't afford tuition without her father's help, and the $500 a month barely covered rent for a studio apartment in a bad neighborhood. She worked 3 jobs: waitress at a diner, retail clerk at a department store, tutoring high school students in art. The shame was almost worse than the poverty. People who'd known her father whispered when she walked by, "Is that James Hart's daughter? The embezzler? I heard she's broke now." Serves them right. Eleanor learned to keep her head down. She learned to ignore the whispers and the stares. She learned to stretch $5 until it covered a week of groceries. Most importantly, she learned not to trust anyone. It took her 6 years to finish her degree, attending night classes at a community college while working full-time. When she finally graduated with her teaching certificate, Eleanor cried alone in her apartment. She'd done it. She'd survived. 3 months into her first teaching job at an elementary school, Eleanor met Victor Hale. It was supposed to be a normal Saturday. Eleanor had volunteered to help set up an art show at a local gallery featuring work from her students. She wore her nicest dress, a simple navy number from Target that had cost $30. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just trying to make her students proud. Victor Hale walked into the gallery like he owned it. And in a way, he did. His family's company owned the building. He was 32, tall and handsome, in an expensive charcoal suit. His watch probably cost more than Eleanor made in 6 months. He stopped in front of a painting by one of Eleanor's 5th graders, a bright, joyful scene of a family picnic. "This is remarkable," he said. "The use of color, the composition. This child has real talent." Eleanor approached hesitantly. In her experience, wealthy men didn't notice elementary school art shows. "That's Maya. She's one of my students. I'm their art teacher, Eleanor Hart." Victor turned, and his smile transformed his entire face. "Victor Hale, it's a pleasure to meet someone who clearly cares about fostering young talent." They talked for 2 hours. Victor asked intelligent questions about art education, about Eleanor's teaching philosophy, about her own painting. He seemed genuinely interested in her answers. When the gallery closed, he asked if she'd like to get dinner. Eleanor almost said no. Men like Victor didn't date women like her. But something in his eyes seemed sincere, and Eleanor was so tired of being alone. Dinner turned into coffee the next day. Coffee turned into a museum visit. Within 3 weeks, they were dating seriously. Victor was charming and attentive. He showed up at her tiny apartment with flowers. He took her to restaurants she could never afford. He listened when she talked about her students or her own art. 6 weeks into the relationship, over dinner at an upscale Italian restaurant, Victor asked about her family. "It's just me," Eleanor said, pushing pasta around her plate. The portions were tiny and the prices astronomical, but she didn't complain. "My mom died when I was 12, car accident, and my dad," she swallowed hard, "he disappeared 8 years ago, James Hart. There was this business scandal and he just vanished." Something flickered in Victor's eyes. Recognition. But it passed so quickly that Eleanor thought she'd imagined found it. "I'm so sorry," Victor said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "That must have been incredibly difficult." What Eleanor didn't see was the calculation happening behind Victor's sympathetic expression. James Hart. That name was familiar. Alexander Stone had mentioned having business dealings with a James Hart years ago. If Hart was dead, or as good as dead, and this was his only child, she might be sitting on a substantial inheritance she didn't even know about. And if Hart was alive somewhere, having his daughter would provide leverage. Either way, Eleanor Hart was suddenly much more interesting to Victor Hale. 2 months later, Victor proposed. He took Eleanor to the same gallery where they'd met and got down on one knee in front of Maya's painting. You make me want to be a better man, Victor said, holding out a modest but beautiful engagement ring. Will you marry me, Eleanor? Through tears of buying, Eleanor said yes. She thought her luck had finally turned. She thought she'd found someone who loved her despite her past, despite her poverty, despite everything. She had no idea she'd just become a pawn in a much larger game. The wedding was small. Katie served as Eleanor's maid of honor. Victor's side of the church was packed with colleagues and family members Eleanor barely knew. Patricia Hale sat in the front row, her expression neutral, but her eyes cold. During the reception, Patricia cornered Eleanor by the punch bowl. I want you to know, Patricia said quietly, that I advised my son against this marriage. You come from nothing. You have nothing. You are nothing. Eleanor felt like she'd been slapped. I love your son, and he loves me. Patricia's laugh was sharp as broken glass. Victor loves what you represent, an untouched canvas he can paint however he likes. But canvases get dirty, Eleanor, and dirty things get thrown away. Before Eleanor could respond, Victor appeared and led his mother away with apologies. She's just protective, he explained later. She'll come around once she gets to know you. But Patricia never did come around, and as the months passed, Eleanor began to realize that her mother-in-law might have been right about one thing. Victor hadn't married her for love. The cracks started showing almost immediately. Victor insisted Eleanor move into his apartment, but he kept their finances completely separate. I like to keep business and personal matters distinct, he explained. Eleanor didn't argue. She was grateful just to live somewhere with hot water that never ran out and appliances that actually worked. But she kept her teaching job. Something inside her knew she needed that independence, that small paycheck that was entirely hers. Victor seemed fine with this arrangement until Eleanor got pregnant. You'll quit, of course, Victor said when she told him the news. Not asked, stated. I love teaching. I thought I'd work until maternity leave. My child won't have a mother who works. His tone left no room for discussion. The Hale heir deserves better than daycare and nannies. You'll stay home. Eleanor wanted to argue, but Victor's face had gone cold in a way that frightened her. So she agreed, already feeling the trap closing around her. Then came the moment that changed everything. 3 months into the pregnancy, Victor demanded to see Eleanor's financial records. I need to know what assets we have, he said, for his estate planning. Eleanor handed over her meager bank statements. $3,000 in savings, $500 deposited monthly from the estate disbursement. Victor stared at the papers, his face turning red. What do you mean you have $3,000? Where's your trust fund? What trust fund? Your father was James Hart. Hart Properties. He had millions in real estate holdings. He lost everything, Eleanor said, confused. That's why he disappeared. I told you this. Victor's expression shifted through several emotions. Rage, frustration, calculation. Finally, he smoothed his face into something neutral. Of course, I forgot. The scandal. But the damage was done. Victor had married Eleanor thinking she was secretly wealthy, or that her father would eventually resurface with money. The discovery that she was exactly as poor as she appeared changed everything. From that day forward, Victor's kindness evaporated. He stayed late at the office. He stopped asking about her day. He answered her texts with one-word responses or didn't answer at all. The pregnancy that should have brought them together instead drove a wedge between them that grew wider every day. Eleanor tried everything. She cooked his favorite meals. She bought lingerie she couldn't afford. She suggested couples therapy. Victor dismissed every attempt with barely concealed contempt. The affair started around month 4 of the pregnancy. Eleanor didn't have proof yet, but she knew. The way Victor showered the moment he came home, the unfamiliar perfume on his shirts, the secretive phone calls in the other room. When Eleanor finally worked up the courage to ask directly, Victor's response was cruel. You're being hormonal and paranoid, he'd said. This is embarrassing, Eleanor. I married you for better or worse. He gestured at her pregnant body with disgust. This is definitely worse. Now, sitting in her apartment 2 days before the Christmas gala, Eleanor wondered how her life had gone so wrong. She'd escaped poverty, only to find herself trapped in a different kind of cage. A golden cage, perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. The $500 still showed up in her account every month, Eleanor had no idea where it came from or who was sending it. She'd stopped trying to figure it out years ago. That money paid for her tiny apartment, her cheap maternity clothes, the clearance on baby supplies. Sometimes late at night, Eleanor would take out the one photograph she had of her father. James Hart, smiling at the camera, his arm around a younger Eleanor at her high school graduation. She'd trace his face with her finger and whisper questions into the darkness. "Where are you, Dad? Are you alive? Did I disappoint you? Is that why you left?" The photograph never answered, and Eleanor never suspected that her father was closer than she could possibly imagine, watching over her from the shadows, building an empire in secret, and waiting for the right moment to step back into her life. That moment was coming. In 2 days, at a Christmas gala, everything would change. But first, Eleanor had to survive what would be the worst night of her life. The morning of the Christmas gala arrived cold and bright. Eleanor stood in her tiny bathroom, staring at the single dress hanging on the back of the door. Light blue maternity dress from Target, $89. It was the most expensive piece of clothing she owned, purchased specifically for this event with money she should have spent on baby supplies. Katie arrived at 9 with makeup and a curling iron. "We're making you gorgeous," Katie declared, pushing past Eleanor into the apartment. "Not that you need help, but if you're going into enemy territory, you're going in looking like a queen." "I'm 7 months pregnant, Katie. I look like a whale." "You look like a goddess creating life. There's a difference." Katie set up her supplies on Eleanor's tiny bathroom counter. "Now sit, let me work my magic." For 2 hours, Katie transformed Eleanor. She swept Eleanor's blonde hair into soft curls that cascaded past her shoulders. She applied makeup that highlighted Eleanor's blue eyes and gave her pale skin a healthy glow. When Eleanor finally stood and looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. I look beautiful." "You always look beautiful." Katie's eyes were suspiciously wet. "You just never see it." Eleanor turned, and Katie helped her into the blue dress. It fit perfectly, flowing around her pregnant belly and making her look ethereal rather than awkward. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered, hugging her best friend. "Just promise me you'll be careful," Katie said. "And call me if anything feels wrong. Anything at all. I don't care if it's midnight. I'll come get you." Eleanor promised, even though she knew she probably wouldn't call. She'd learned long ago not to burden people with her problems. The Uber ride to Frostfall Estate took 45 minutes. Eleanor had asked Victor if they could ride together, but he dismissed the suggestion immediately. "I have business to handle before the party," he'd said. "You'll need to make your own way there." So Eleanor sat alone in the back of a stranger's car, watching the city give way to suburbs and then to sprawling countryside estates. Snow had fallen the night before, covering everything in pristine white. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt ominous. The driver turned down a long, private road lined with old-growth trees. At the end, a massive mansion rose against the gray sky like something from a fairy tale. Frostfall Estate. Even the name sounded cold. "You sure this is the right place?" the driver asked, clearly impressed. "This is like Millionaire Central." "I'm sure," Eleanor said quietly, though inside she felt anything but sure. She tipped the driver with money she couldn't spare and stepped out into the cold. Valets in formal uniforms directed arriving guests. Women emerged from luxury cars in fur coats and glittering jewelry. Men wore designer suits worth more than Eleanor made in a year. Eleanor clutched her simple black coat, 7 years old, bought on clearance, and walked toward the entrance. Her modest blue dress suddenly felt wrong. Too cheap, too plain, too obviously not belonging. Inside, the mansion was breathtaking. A 40-foot Christmas tree dominated the grand foyer, decorated entirely in gold and silver. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings. An orchestra played classical holiday music. Ice sculptures sparkled under carefully placed lights. Eleanor searched the crowd for Victor, her anxiety mounting with each passing second. Finally, she spotted him across the ballroom. He was standing close to a stunning woman in a blood-red gown that probably cost more than Eleanor's monthly rent. The woman was everything Eleanor wasn't. Tall, thin, confident. Her dark hair was swept up in an elaborate style. Diamonds sparkled at her throat and wrists, and she was touching Victor's arm while he laughed at something she'd said. Eleanor felt something crack inside his chest. She started walking toward them, her hands instinctively moving to protect her belly. But before she could reach Victor, someone intercepted her. Eleanor. Patricia Hale appeared as if summoned, her expression cold behind a mask of politeness. How unexpected that you actually came. Victor invited me. Yes, well, my son has always been too kind for his own good. Patricia looked Eleanor up and down, her nose wrinkling slightly. That dress is quaint, very budget-friendly. Nearby guests turned to look. A few whispered behind their hands. Eleanor's face burned with humiliation. I should go find Victor. Oh, I wouldn't interrupt him right now. He's with Sabrina Voss. Lovely girl. Influencer, you know. 400,000 followers. Patricia's smile was sharp. They've become quite close recently. The words hit like physical blows. So that was her name. Sabrina, the woman who was sleeping with Eleanor's husband. Excuse me, Eleanor managed, pushing past Patricia toward the restrooms. She needed a moment to breathe, to collect herself, to remember why she'd agreed to come here in the first place. The hallway to the restrooms was blissfully empty. Eleanor leaned against the wall, one hand on her racing heart, the other on her belly where the baby was kicking anxiously. It's okay, sweet pea, she whispered. Mama's okay, we're okay. But they weren't okay, nothing was okay, and it was about to get so much worse. Eleanor was about to continue to the restroom when she heard voices coming from a partially open door down the hallway. She recognized one of them immediately. Patricia. The other was unfamiliar but female, young and confident. Eleanor knew she should keep walking. Eavesdropping was wrong, but something made her pause and listen. Tonight she learns her place. The unfamiliar voice. Sabrina, Eleanor realized with growing dread. After this, Victor divorces her and we keep the baby. Excellent. Patricia's voice dripped with satisfaction. The Hale heir raised properly, not by some poverty-stricken art teacher. I've already spoken with our lawyers. Once we establish her instability, the wine will help with that. Sabrina laughed. Red shows up beautifully on light blue. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. They were planning something, planning to humiliate her, to use it against her somehow, to take her baby. You're absolutely wicked, Patricia said admiringly. I knew I liked you. So much better than that mousy thing Victor married. Eleanor backed away from the door, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She had to leave, had to get out of here before whatever they were planning could happen. She turned toward the exit, but Victor appeared in the hallway, blocking her path. Eleanor, there you are. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Where are you going? I don't feel well. I need to leave. Victor's hand shot out and gripped her arm. Not hard enough to leave a mark, but hard enough to hurt. Hard enough to make his point clear. You're not going anywhere, he said quietly. You'll stay, you'll smile, and you won't embarrass me. Do you understand? Victor, you're hurting me. Do you understand? Eleanor looked into her husband's eyes and saw nothing but cold calculation. Whatever love might have existed between them, if it had ever existed at all, was completely gone. If you leave, Victor continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, I'll make sure you never see this baby. My lawyers versus your teacher salary, you'll lose everything. He released her arm and walked away, leaving Eleanor frozen in the hallway. Trapped. She had no car, no way home, and now she knew that Patricia and Sabrina were planning something terrible. Eleanor's phone buzzed, a text from Katie. How's it going? You okay? Eleanor's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She could tell Katie everything. Katie would come get her, would help her leave, would protect her. But then Victor would follow through on his threat. He'd use her early departure as evidence of instability. He'd paint her as an unfit mother. And with his money and lawyers, he'd probably win. Eleanor typed back, everything's fine, beautiful party. The lie tasted bitter, but Eleanor swallowed it down along with all her fear and dread. She smoothed her dress, checked her makeup in a hallway mirror, and walked back toward the ballroom. She had no idea that high above on a private balcony, a man was watching her every move. A man who'd been gone for 8 years but had never truly left. A man who was about to watch his daughter be destroyed, and who had already decided that everyone responsible would pay dearly for what they were about to do. James Hart, known to the world as Alexander Stone, gripped the balcony railing so hard his knuckles turned white. "Not yet," he murmured to Marcus, who stood beside him. "Let them show their true colors first. I need undeniable evidence." "Sir, she's your daughter. Are you sure you want to watch this?" James's jaw tightened. Every instinct screamed at him to run down there, to pull Eleanor away from these vultures, to protect her the way he'd failed to protect her 8 years ago. But he'd learned patience in his years of exile. He'd learned that justice required evidence and strategy. "I'm sure," James said, though his voice was rough with emotion. "Whatever happens tonight, we'll have everything on camera. And then," his eyes hardened, "and then they'll learn what it means to hurt a heart." Below, Eleanor walked back into the ballroom, unaware that her father was watching, unaware that hidden cameras were recording every angle, unaware that she was walking straight into an ambush that would be witnessed by hundreds of people and captured on dozens of phones. The trap was set. The players were in position. And in less than an hour, Eleanor's life would shatter in the most public, humiliating way possible. But from that shattering would come something unexpected. Strength, fury, and a father's long-delayed revenge. Eleanor moved through the ballroom like a ghost, trying to make herself invisible. She attempted to join the conversation circles, but the moment she approached, people would find excuses to move away. She tried to sit, but every chair was mysteriously saved for someone else. She stood alone by the massive Christmas tree, one hand on her aching lower back, the other protectively cradling her belly. The baby kicked hard, responding to Eleanor's rising stress. "I know, sweet pea," she whispered. "I know this is awful. We'll leave soon, just a little longer." But even as she said it, Eleanor knew she was lying. Victor wouldn't let her leave. Patricia and Sabrina were planning something, and Eleanor was trapped in this beautiful mansion like a prisoner in a gilded cage. Across the room, Victor stood close to Sabrina, laughing at something she said. His hand rested on the small of her back in a gesture that was unmistakably intimate. He showed her more affection in 30 seconds than he'd shown Eleanor in 6 months. Pain lanced through Eleanor's chest. Not just the pain of betrayal, but the deeper pain of knowing she'd never really mattered to him. She'd been a means to an end, nothing more. And now that she'd failed to deliver the inheritance he'd expected, she was worse than nothing. She was an inconvenience. Patricia materialized beside her again, seeming to take pleasure in Eleanor's isolation. "You look tired, dear," Patricia said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Perhaps you should sit down." "Oh, but there don't seem to be any available seats. How unfortunate." A few people laughed. Eleanor's face burned. "I'm fine," Eleanor said through clenched teeth. "Are you sure? You seem rather unsteady. The pregnancy must be taking a toll. I do hope you're taking care of yourself. My grandson deserves a healthy start." The words were sweet, but the tone was poison. Patricia was setting the scene, planting seeds of doubt about Eleanor's stability and fitness as a mother. Eleanor recognized the manipulation, but she didn't know how to fight it without making things worse. Then Sabrina approached, a wine glass in her perfectly manicured hand. The liquid inside was deep red, almost burgundy. It caught the light from the chandeliers, looking disturbingly like blood. "Eleanor!" Sabrina's voice carried across the nearby conversations, drawing attention. "You look absolutely exhausted. Maybe you should sit down." "Oh, wait." She looked around theatrically. "There don't seem to be any chairs. How sad." Several people had stopped talking now, sensing drama. Phones appeared, held discreetly at chest height, cameras aimed at the pregnant woman standing alone. "I'm fine, thank you," Eleanor repeated, trying to keep her voice steady. "Are you sure? You seem unsteady. Here, let me help." Eleanor saw it happening but couldn't move fast enough to avoid it. She was boxed in by the crowd, backed against the wall near the massive fireplace. No escape route. No way to dodge. Sabrina's wrist flicked in a movement that was unmistakably deliberate. The wine flew from the glass in a perfect arc. Time seemed to slow down. Eleanor watched the red liquid sail through the air, drops catching the light like blood diamonds. Her hand moved instinctively to shield her belly, but there was nothing she could do to protect her face or dress. The wine hit with shocking warmth. It exploded across Eleanor's face, soaking into her hair, streaming down her neck. The light blue dress instantly turned crimson, the stain spreading like she'd been stabbed. For one perfect second, the entire ballroom held its breath. Then came the gasps, the screams, the sudden eruption of camera phones rising like a forest of lights, flash after flash after flash, capturing Eleanor's devastated expression from every angle. Patricia rushed forward with a performance worthy of an Oscar. "Oh heavens! Eleanor, you've spilled wine all over yourself. I'm so sorry." Sabrina's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with fake concern. "You bumped my arm. I didn't mean—" But Eleanor had seen it, seen the deliberate flick of Sabrina's wrist, seen the satisfaction in her eyes before she'd schooled her expression to false sympathy. "You did that on purpose," Eleanor whispered, wine dripping from her face. "Oh my God, she's so paranoid," Sabrina said loudly to the crowd. "I think the pregnancy is affecting her mental state." The crowd murmured agreement. Poor thing, so unstable. Did you see how she stumbled into Sabrina? The wine was an accident. The pregnant woman is clearly unwell. Eleanor couldn't breathe. The wine stung her eyes. Tears mixed with the liquid, streaming down her cheeks in thin red lines. The baby kicked violently inside her, disturbed by the sudden spike in Eleanor's heart rate and cortisol levels. "Victor?" Eleanor pleaded, looking desperately at her husband. "Please, help me." Victor walked over slowly, his expression one of irritated disgust rather than concern. Instead of offering support, he made everything worse. "Eleanor, control yourself," he said coldly. "This is embarrassing. Look what you've done. You're making a scene." "I didn't. She threw it at me." "You're being hysterical, as usual." The words struck like physical blows. Eleanor's legs trembled. The room was spinning. Every phone camera was trained on her humiliation. This moment was being live-streamed, posted, shared, making its way across the internet at lightning speed. Eleanor's vision started to blur. She couldn't get enough air. Her chest felt tight, like someone was sitting on it. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Eleanor doubled over slightly. "I think I'm going to—" she began. Then a voice rang out from above. Deep, commanding, furious enough to cut through the crowd's noise like a blade through silk. "Touch my daughter again, and you'll learn what it means to lose everything." Every head in the ballroom turned toward the balcony. The orchestra stopped mid-note. Even the phones lowered slightly as 200 guests tried to see who had spoken. A man stood at the top of the grand staircase, backlit by the massive chandelier. He was distinguished-looking, late 50s, wearing an expensive suit. But what struck Eleanor most was his expression, pure, barely contained rage. He began descending the stairs. Each footstep echoed in the silent ballroom. 22 steps from balcony to main floor. Eleanor counted each one, her mind unable to process what she was seeing. That walk, those shoulders, the way he held his head. She knew these things from somewhere deep in her memory, from a time before everything had fallen apart. The man reached the bottom of the stairs and walked directly toward Eleanor. The crowd parted automatically, creating a path. Nobody dared block him. He stopped directly in front of Eleanor and gently took her wine-stained face in his hands. His eyes were kind and furious and filled with an emotion Eleanor had forgotten existed. "Eleanor," he said softly. Eleanor squinted through her tears, trying to understand what she was seeing. The face was older, the hair grayer, but the eyes, those eyes she'd know anywhere. "Dad," she whispered. "I'm here now, sweetheart. I'm here." James Hart removed his expensive coat and wrapped it around Eleanor's shoulders, covering the wine-stained dress. Then he pulled her into a protective embrace. Eleanor collapsed against him, sobbing. 8 years of abandonment, 8 years of believing herself unloved and forgotten, shattered in an instant. Her father was here. He'd come back. He'd come for her. "I thought you were gone forever," she choked out between sobs. "I thought you didn't want me." "Never," James's voice broke. "Not for 1 second. I'm so sorry, Eleanor. I'm so sorry." He turned to face the shocked crowd, one arm still protectively around his daughter. "The woman who was just assaulted," he emphasized the word deliberately, "is Eleanor Hart, my daughter." Gasps exploded throughout the ballroom. Victor went white as paper. Sabrina's wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the marble floor. Patricia actually staggered backward, one hand clutching her chest. And for those who don't know me, James continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the massive room, I'm Alexander Stone. I own this estate. He looked directly at Victor. I own the building where Hale Industries rents its office space. In fact, I own 40% of the commercial real estate in this city. Victor's face cycled through shock, horror, and dawning realization. He'd married Eleanor thinking she was broke, never knowing her father was Alexander Stone, one of the wealthiest real estate developers in the region. I've been watching tonight, James said, and I've seen enough. Marcus? A man appeared from the side door, tall military bearing, clearly security. He held a tablet. Sir, police are here as requested. Sirens became audible outside. Red and blue lights flashed through the massive windows. The front doors opened, and officers led by a sharp-eyed female detective entered the ballroom. Eleanor sagged against her father with relief. It was over. Justice was coming. They'd be arrested, all of them. Patricia, Sabrina, Victor. She was safe now. Her father had come back, and he'd made it right. The detective, her badge read Detective Sarah Morrison, approached with professional efficiency. Mr. Stone, thank you for calling us. Detective Morrison, James gestured to Eleanor. My daughter was just assaulted with a wine glass in front of 200 witnesses. Everything was captured on the security cameras. Marcus handed the tablet to Detective Morrison. She watched the footage, her expression growing harder with each second. The wine attack was captured in perfect HD. Sabrina's deliberate throw, Patricia's false shock, Victor's cold dismissal of his wife's distress. That's clear assault, Morrison said. Ma'am, she turned to Sabrina, I need you to come with me. Sabrina backed away, shaking her head. No, it was an accident. She bumped into me. Tell them, Victor. But before Victor could respond, another figure entered the ballroom. An older man in a police captain's uniform, his chest covered in medals and commendations. Patricia's face flooded with relief. Captain Hale, thank goodness you're here. Captain Gerald Hale, Victor's uncle. Eleanor felt her brief moment of hope crumble. Captain Hale took the tablet from Detective Morrison and reviewed the footage. He watched it twice, his expression unreadable. Then he handed it back. Detective Morrison, stand down. Morrison's eyes widened. Sir, the evidence is clear. This is a civil matter, Captain Hale said firmly. Accidental spillage at worst. No crime was committed. Captain, that footage shows deliberate assault on a pregnant woman. Are you questioning my judgment, Detective? Morrison's jaw clenched, but she said nothing. Eleanor watched in horror as the captain dismissed everything, as the system bent to accommodate wealth and family connections. Captain Hale turned to Sabrina with a smile. Miss Voss, you're free to go. My apologies for the confusion. To Patricia, Mrs. Hale, I'm sorry for this disruption to your evening. To Victor, my office will handle any misunderstandings. Sabrina's false terror melted into a smirk. Patricia exhaled with visible relief. Victor looked directly at Eleanor with triumph in his eyes. See, he said quietly enough that only she, James, and a few nearby people could hear. You have nothing. You are nothing. James stepped forward, his voice dangerously quiet. Captain Hale, interesting that you share a last name with the accused. Family relations don't affect my professional judgment, Mr. Stone. They will when Internal Affairs investigates. James's tone promised consequences. Captain Hale seemed unfazed. Good luck with that. Now I think it's time everyone went home. Party's over. The crowd began to disperse, disappointed at the anticlimactic ending. Eleanor stood there, wine-stained and broken, watching her last hope of justice walk out the door. Katie appeared suddenly, pushing through the crowd. Oh my God, I saw it online. I came as fast as I could. Eleanor looked at her father, then at Katie, then at Victor's smug face. I want to go home, she whispered. I'll take you, James began. She's my wife, Victor said, suddenly possessive. She comes with me. No. Eleanor's voice was small but firm. Katie, please, take me home. Katie immediately wrapped an arm around Eleanor and began guiding her toward the exit. As they walked away, Patricia called after them. Think carefully about your next moves, Eleanor. You're outmatched. You always were. James watched his daughter leave, every muscle in his body screaming at him to follow. But Marcus touched his arm gently. Sir, we have everything on camera, multiple angles. And Detective Morrison, I've done research. She's one of the good ones. She'll help. Follow Eleanor, James ordered quietly. 24-hour protection. And get me everything on Captain Gerald Hale. Every dirty deal, every bribe, every skeleton in his closet. Already working on it, sir. Outside, snow continued to fall. Katie helped Eleanor into her car, both of them silent. What was there to say? Hope had come and been destroyed in less than 20 minutes. As they drove away from Frostfall Estate, Eleanor stared at her wine-stained hands. They're going to get away with it, she said hollowly. All of it. Katie had no answer. They both knew Eleanor was probably right. But what neither of them knew was that James Hart had spent 8 years building an empire and learning patience. He'd waited this long to reveal himself. He could wait a little longer to destroy the people who had hurt his daughter. The wine attack was just the beginning. And by the time James was done, everyone who'd participated would wish they'd never heard the name Eleanor Hart. Eleanor woke on her couch still wearing the wine-stained dress. She'd fallen asleep crying, Katie asleep in the armchair nearby. Morning light filtered through the cheap blinds, and for one blessed moment, Eleanor forgot about the party. Then her phone buzzed, and buzzed again, and again. Eleanor reached for it with trembling hands. The screen showed 1,247 notifications. Her heart sank. Katie, she croaked. Katie, wake up. Katie jerked awake. What? What's wrong? Eleanor just held up her phone, unable to speak. Katie grabbed it and started scrolling. Her expression shifted from confusion to horror to rage in 30 seconds. Oh no. The video had gone viral, 3.2 million views. The wine attack captured from a dozen different angles, edited together into a perfect clip of Eleanor's humiliation. But worse than the view count were the comments. Gold digger got what she deserved. She clearly bumped into her El Mayu clumsy. Much? Imagine being this desperate for a rich man's money. That baby is probably not even his. Eleanor scrolled and scrolled, each comment another knife to her heart. Thousands of strangers had opinions about her life, her marriage, her worth as a human being, and they were all terrible. Don't read those, Katie said, trying to take the phone back. They don't know you. They don't know what really happened. But Eleanor kept reading, unable to stop. The pain was almost addictive. Each hateful comment confirmed what she'd been afraid of all along, that she was worthless, that she deserved this, that everyone could see how broken she was. Then she found the articles. Pregnant woman causes scene at elite Christmas gala. Eleanor Hart Hale, history of attention-seeking behavior, sources say. Unstable mother-to-be disrupts holiday charity event. Eleanor clicked on one article. The writing was clearly paid placement, probably by Patricia. It painted Eleanor as manipulative and obsessed with Victor's wealth. It included carefully selected photos. Eleanor looking angry, Eleanor crying, Eleanor's face twisted in pain, all taken from last night but stripped of context. Sabrina had given a statement. I feel terrible. My hand accidentally brushed hers. I never meant to spill. She seemed very unstable that evening. This can't be happening, Eleanor whispered. Katie, they're making me look crazy. We'll fix this. We'll post your side of the story. Who's going to believe me? Eleanor's voice rose. Victor's rich. Sabrina has 400,000 followers. Patricia knows everyone, and I'm nobody. Her phone rang, the school principal. Eleanor, Principal Davis said without preamble, I'm sorry, but given the publicity around last night's incident, we think it's best if you take early maternity leave, effective immediately. But I'm only 7 months pregnant. I need the income. It's not negotiable. Several parents have called expressing concerns. It's too disruptive. The line went dead. Eleanor had just been fired. She sat there staring at her phone, trying to process that in less than 12 hours she'd been publicly humiliated, gone viral as an internet villain, and lost her job. It's going to be okay, Katie said, though her voice lacked conviction. You'll find another position after the baby comes, and I'll help with money. You know I will. But Katie was a nurse living on a nurse's salary. She couldn't support 2 people plus a baby. Eleanor knew that. They both knew that. A knock at the door made them both jump. Eleanor's landlord, Mr. Collins, stood in the hallway looking uncomfortable. Miss Hart, I'm sorry, but I need you out by end of month. Eleanor's stomach dropped. What? Why? I've always paid rent on time. I received a substantial offer to buy out your lease. Very substantial. I can't turn it down. He handed her an envelope. 30-day notice. I'm sorry. The door closed. Eleanor opened the envelope with shaking hands. The buyout was from a shell company, but Eleanor knew who was really behind it. Patricia. They're destroying my life, Eleanor said numbly. Piece by piece, they're taking everything. Katie hugged her tight. But what could she do? What could anyone do against the combined wealth and power of the Hale family? Eleanor's phone pinged again, a text from her bank. Account temporarily frozen due to legal dispute. Please contact customer service. Eleanor called immediately. The representative explained that Victor's lawyers had filed paperwork claiming joint account disputes. It could take weeks to resolve. But my paycheck goes into that account. It's my money. I understand, ma'am, but until the dispute is resolved, the account remains frozen. Eleanor hung up and checked her wallet. $47 cash. That was all she had in the world. Katie had to leave for her 12-hour shift at the hospital. Eleanor promised she'd be okay, but it was a lie. The moment Katie left, Eleanor collapsed. She couldn't stop scrolling through the hateful comments. Couldn't stop reading the articles. Couldn't stop watching the video over and over, seeing herself through the eyes of millions of strangers. Seeing herself as they saw her. Pathetic, weak, worthless. By evening, Eleanor hadn't eaten. The baby kicked anxiously, disturbed by Eleanor's stress. Eleanor stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Dark circles, hollow cheeks, dull eyes. On the counter, pushed to the back of the medicine cabinet, the bottle of sleeping pills called to her. Eleanor opened the cabinet, picked up the bottle, counted 30 pills. It would be so easy, she whispered to her reflection. Just go to sleep and never wake up. Never have to face Victor or Patricia or Sabrina again. Never have to see another hateful comment. Just nothing. Her hand hovered over the bottle cap. Then her baby kicked hard, almost painful, as if saying, I'm here, Mama. Don't forget about me. Eleanor dropped the bottle. Pills scattered across the bathroom floor. She sank down and gathered them with shaking hands, sobbing, I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. Mama's just tired. I promise I would never. She put the pills away, closed the cabinet, and left the bathroom. But the darkness had touched her now. The knowledge that there was a way out, a permanent way out, sat in the back of her mind like a loaded gun. Eleanor curled up on the couch and pulled out her phone one more time. Against all better judgment, she checked the viral video again. 5 million views now. The comments had evolved into memes. Her wine-stained face was being photoshopped onto movie scenes, historical photographs, famous paintings. Eleanor Hart had become a joke, a cautionary tale, a viral moment that people would share for laughs. And tomorrow things would get even worse. Day 3 arrived with another phone call, unknown number. Mrs. Hale, this is St. Mary's Hospital. Your husband was in a car accident. Eleanor's heart stopped. Is he alive? Yes, but he's asking for you. Please come quickly. Katie drove Eleanor to the hospital in silence, both of them worried. Eleanor's feelings about Victor were complicated. He'd hurt her deeply, but she didn't want him dead. And despite everything, a small part of her still hoped he'd change, that he'd see how much she was suffering and feel something, anything. They rushed into the hospital and up to the information desk. Victor Hale? Car accident? The nurse looked confused. We have no patient by that name. Eleanor turned. Victor stood there, perfectly healthy, smirking. Behind him stood 4 lawyers in expensive suits. You're not hurt, Eleanor said stupidly. Obviously not, Victor replied. This was a trap. Finally catching on, Victor snapped his fingers. The lead lawyer stepped forward. Eleanor Hart Hale, you're being served. Thick envelope shoved into Eleanor's hands. She opened it with shaking fingers. Divorce papers. Emergency custody petition. What is this? My client is filing for divorce on grounds of mental instability, the lawyer, Mitchell Crane, said. He spread photos across a nearby table. Eleanor crying, Eleanor disheveled, Eleanor staring at a bottle of pills. How did you... Those are from my apartment. Hired investigator. Perfectly legal. Mitchell smiled. Evidence of depression, instability, inability to care for a child. Eleanor's world tilted. They'd been in her apartment, photographing her without permission, documenting her breakdown. Upon birth, child will be placed in father's custody pending psychiatric evaluation of mother. You can't take my baby. Eleanor's voice rose, drawing attention from other people in the hospital. Mitchell produced more documents. Affidavits. Patricia's statement claiming Eleanor had always been unstable, prone to violent outbursts. Sabrina's statement claiming Eleanor had attacked her at the Christmas party. 3 people Eleanor barely knew, friends from Victor's social circle, all paid to say Eleanor was erratic and unbalanced. Here's what's going to happen, Victor said, stepping close enough that Eleanor could smell his expensive cologne. You're going to sign full custody over to me, right now. In exchange, I'll give you $50,000 and you'll disappear. Change your name, leave the state. Never. Then we'll destroy you in court. You have no money, no lawyer, no chance. My family has connections you can't imagine. You'll lose, Eleanor. You'll lose everything. Patricia swept in then, her timing too perfect to be coincidental. Eleanor, dear, be reasonable. That baby is a Hale. You're just the incubator. We'll raise the child properly, with advantages you could never provide. I'm the mother, Eleanor said, tears streaming. You're a broke art teacher with no home, and no prospects. That baby deserves better than you. Then Sabrina arrived, the final piece of their coordinated ambush. She placed a hand on her flat stomach. Oh, Eleanor, didn't Victor tell you? We're trying for a baby. A legitimate one. She smiled cruelly. Your child will have a little brother or sister soon. They'll grow up together. But yours will always know Mommy wasn't good enough to keep them. Eleanor was surrounded, Victor, Patricia, Sabrina, lawyers, cameras, all staring at her, waiting for her to break, papers in her hand, pen offered. Her hand shook as she reached for the pen. Maybe they were right. Maybe her baby did deserve better than this, better than her. She had no money, no home, no booth, no support. What kind of life could she give this child? The pen touched paper. Eleanor began forming the first letter of her name. Don't you dare. Katie slapped the papers out of Eleanor's hand. You listen to me, Eleanor Madison Hart. You are the strongest woman I know. You worked 3 jobs to finish school. You survived losing your dad. You can survive this. Katie turned to Victor. And you're a coward, a pathetic, cruel coward. Security, remove this woman, Victor said. Katie grabbed Eleanor's arm. We're leaving. Come on, Elle. They rushed toward the exit. Victor called after them. You have 72 hours to sign, Eleanor. After that, we file in court, and you'll lose everything anyway. In the car, Eleanor couldn't stop shaking. They're gonna take my baby. Katie, they're gonna take my baby. No, they're not. We're going to fight. I know a lawyer who might help. Pro bono work. We'll figure this out. But Eleanor barely heard. The walls were closing in. Every escape route blocked. No money, no dough, no home. And now they were coming for the only thing she had left, her child. That night, alone in her apartment, Eleanor sat on the bathroom floor and seriously considered those pills again. It would be so easy. Just swallow them all and drift away. The baby would die too, but at least the Hales couldn't have it. At least her child wouldn't grow up knowing its mother wasn't good enough. Eleanor picked up the bottle, opened it, poured pills into her palm. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Eleanor almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Miss Hart? A woman's voice. My name is Jennifer Martinez. I'm a lawyer. Your friend Katie contacted me about your situation. I think I can help. Eleanor started crying. I don't have money for a lawyer. I know. This would be pro bono. Can you meet me tomorrow? Eleanor looked at the pills in her hand. Then she poured them back into the bottle. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll meet you. She hung up and pressed her hands to her belly. Okay, baby. Okay, Mama's going to fight. I promise, son. It was the first glimmer of hope in days. Eleanor had no idea how fragile that hope was or how quickly it would be shattered. Jennifer Martinez met Eleanor at a coffee shop. She was young, maybe 30, with sharp eyes and an earnest expression. "I reviewed the custody petition," Jennifer said, spreading documents across the table. "And here's the good news. They made mistakes, filed in the wrong jurisdiction. This is premature. They can't actually file for custody until the baby is born, and there's no immediate danger claim that would warrant emergency action." Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. "So what does that mean?" "It means I can get this dismissed on a technicality. Buy you time. The hearing is tomorrow with Judge Harrison. She's fair, doesn't let wealth influence her decisions." For the first time in days, Eleanor felt like she could breathe. "You really think we can win?" "I think we have a solid case for dismissal. After that, we'll deal with the next steps." The next morning, Eleanor sat in a small courtroom. Victor's legal team looked confident, but Jennifer seemed calm. Judge Harrison, an African-American woman in her 60s with a no-nonsense expression, reviewed the documents carefully. "Your Honor," Jennifer argued, "this petition was filed improperly. Wrong jurisdiction, premature filing, and there's no evidence of immediate danger to the unborn child." Victor's lawyer sputtered protest, but Judge Harrison cut him off. "Petition dismissed." Her gavel struck. "Mr. Hale, if you wish to pursue custody, refile properly after the child is born." "And sir," she gave Victor a stern look, "these tactics border on harassment. I don't appreciate my courtroom being used for intimidation." Eleanor nearly collapsed with relief. Katie, sitting beside her, hugged her tight. "You won," Katie whispered. "You actually won." Outside the courthouse, snow fell gently. Eleanor looked up at the gray sky, tears of relief streaming down her face. "We're okay, baby," she whispered, hand on her belly. "We're going to be okay." "Let's celebrate," Katie said. "Get some lunch. You haven't eaten properly in days." They went to a small diner. Eleanor actually smiled as she ordered. For the first time in almost a week, hope felt possible. The system had worked. A judge had seen through Victor's manipulation. Maybe things really could get better. They talked about baby names, about Eleanor finding a new apartment, about what life might look like after the baby came. Normal things, happy things. Eleanor laughed at something Katie said, actually laughed, and for a moment she felt like herself again. They didn't notice the black sedan parked across the street, didn't see Sabrina sitting in the driver's seat, phone pressed to her ear, watching them through the diner window. Eleanor and Katie left the diner full and happy. The parking lot behind the building was mostly empty, snow-covered, quiet. Eleanor was mid-sentence telling Katie about a dream she'd had when a figure stepped out from behind a van. "Sabrina." "Enjoy your little victory?" Sabrina's voice was venomous. Eleanor stopped. "Sabrina, leave me alone." "You should have signed those papers, you stupid bitch." Sabrina moved closer. "You think you can embarrass Victor? Embarrass me?" "Katie, let's go." Eleanor turned toward the car. Sabrina lunged forward and shoved Eleanor hard with both hands. Everything happened in slow motion. Eleanor stumbled backward, her foot caught on ice. She fell, unable to catch herself, her pregnant belly making her off balance. The impact with concrete was brutal. Eleanor's head snapped back. Her hand instinctively went to protect her stomach, but it was too late. Sharp, stabbing pain exploded through her abdomen. "Eleanor!" Katie screamed. Eleanor curled on the cold ground, snow soaking through her clothes. Warm wetness spread between her legs. Blood. She was bleeding. "No, no, no, please no," Eleanor whispered. "My baby. Please not my baby." Sabrina backed away, her face pale. "I didn't. You slipped. It's not." She ran to her car and sped away, tires screeching. Katie was already on the phone. 911, my friend is 7 months pregnant and she's bleeding." Paramedics arrived in minutes. They loaded Eleanor onto a gurney, started an IV, attached monitors. Eleanor stared at the gray sky, watching snowfall, and felt her world dissolving. "Is my baby okay?" she kept asking. "Please tell me my baby's okay." "Ma'am, stay calm. We're taking you to St. Mary's." In the ambulance, Katie held Eleanor's hand while a paramedic checked vitals. Eleanor's vision blurred. The pain was intensifying. And the blood. There was so much blood. At the hospital, Dr. Rachel Foster, Eleanor's OBGYN, met them in the emergency room. She was the only person in this nightmare who'd consistently been kind to Eleanor. Eleanor, I need you to stay calm while I examine you. Dr. Foster's face was serious. Too serious. The ultrasound revealed the damage. You have a partial placental abruption, Dr. Foster said gently. The baby's heartbeat is present but unstable. This is very serious. What does that mean? It means there's about a 40% chance of premature labor. If that happens at 29 weeks, we're looking at significant complications. Survival rate is around 70%, and we're looking at probable long-term health issues. Eleanor couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This morning she'd been celebrating. Now her baby might die. We're admitting you for monitoring, complete bed rest. Any change in the baby's condition, we'll need to perform an emergency C-section. They settled Eleanor in a hospital room. Monitors beeped steadily, tracking the baby's heartbeat. Beep, beep, beep. Katie stayed as long as she could, but eventually her hospital called. Mass casualty accident. All hands needed. I don't want to leave you, Katie said, torn. Go, Eleanor whispered. People need you. I'll be fine. It was a lie. Eleanor was not fine, but she wouldn't keep Katie from her job. After Katie left, Eleanor was alone. Completely alone. She tried calling her father, this James Alexander person who'd appeared at the party. The number Marcus had given her went to voicemail. Hours passed. Eleanor stared at the ceiling, listening to her baby's heartbeat on the monitor. Beep, beep, beep. As long as that sound continued, her baby was alive. Please stay with me, Eleanor whispered to her belly. Please don't leave me. You're all I have left. If I lose you, I have nothing. The monitor continued its steady rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. Then, around 2 in the morning, the rhythm changed. Beep, 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 beep. Eleanor's eyes flew open. The heartbeat was accelerating. Nurse, she called. No response. Nurse! Dr. Foster rushed in with 2 nurses. Baby's in distress. Heart rate 210 and climbing. Dr. Foster pulled up the ultrasound. The abruption is worsening. She turned to Eleanor, her expression grave. Eleanor, we need to make a decision. We can perform an emergency C-section now, but at 29 weeks, survival rate is 70% with likely complications. Or we can wait and hope the abruption stabilizes. But if it gets worse, we could lose the baby entirely. Eleanor was alone. No Katie, no father, no one. And she had to make this impossible choice. I need an answer, Eleanor. What do you want to do? The monitor alarm was screaming now. Baby's heart rate, 220, 225, 230. Eleanor couldn't think, couldn't breathe. What if she chose wrong? What if her decision killed her baby? Baby, please, she sobbed. Tell me what to do. The monitor alarm reached a fever pitch. Then, beep, flatline. We've lost fetal heartbeat, Dr. Foster shouted. Code blue, nurses rushed in. Eleanor screamed, no, save my baby, please. 5 seconds of flatline, 5 seconds that felt like forever, 5 seconds of Eleanor's world ending. Then, beep, 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 the heartbeat returned, weak but present. Dr. Foster leaned over Eleanor, her face pale. Heartbeat's back, but very unstable. Eleanor, your baby can't take much more stress. We're keeping you on continuous monitoring. Any further deterioration, we operate immediately. She left. The nurses left. Eleanor was alone again in the dark room. She looked out the window at the falling snow, pressed her hands to her belly where her baby lay, clinging to life by a thread. Dad, where are you? She whispered into the darkness. I need you. I need you so much. But James didn't come. Nobody came. Eleanor was utterly, completely alone with her fear and her barely alive baby and the knowledge that at any moment, the monitor might flatline again, this time permanently. James Hart received the call at 3 in the morning. Marcus's voice was tight with urgency. Sir, you need to get to St. Mary's. Eleanor was attacked, placental abruption. The baby, it's bad, sir. James was in his car in 2 minutes. He'd been dealing with legal issues stemming from the Christmas party. Captain Gerald Hale had filed countercharges of harassment and threatening an officer. Bureaucratic traps meant to keep James occupied while the Hales consolidated their position. But nothing mattered now except getting to Eleanor. He arrived at the hospital to find his daughter asleep, hooked to monitors. Dr. Foster intercepted him in the hallway. "Mr. Hart, your daughter and grandchild are stable for now, but it was very close. The baby flatlined for 5 seconds. If this happens again," she didn't need to finish. James sat beside Eleanor's bed and took her hand gently. Her eyes fluttered open. "Dad? I'm here now. I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner." Eleanor broke down sobbing. "They tried to take my baby. They're going to keep trying. I can't fight them alone. I don't have the money, the lawyers, the power." "Eleanor." James waited until she met his eyes. "You're not alone. You've never been alone. I've been building a case for 5 days, and now—" His voice hardened. "They've gone too far." Later that morning, against doctor's orders but with extreme caution, James brought Eleanor to his private office. He opened a hidden door to reveal a room covered wall-to-wall with evidence. Eleanor stared in shock. "What is all this?" "8 years ago, I was framed by Victor's father, Charles Hale." James showed Eleanor forged documents, fabricated evidence. "Charles wanted my properties. When I wouldn't sell, he destroyed me. So you disappeared to get revenge?" "To protect you and to rebuild so I could protect you properly." James explained his 8-year plan, the alias, the rebuilt empire, $2.3 billion in real estate. "I've been investigating the Hale family for years," James continued. "Victor married you thinking I was dead and you'd inherit. When he learned you had nothing, he turned cruel. But he didn't know James Hart and Alexander Stone were the same person." He showed Eleanor the damning evidence. Recordings of Patricia and Victor planning to eliminate competition, meaning James. Victor's embezzlement, $4.2 million over 3 years. Sabrina's pattern of targeting and blackmailing wealthy men. Captain Gerald Hale's corruption. Bank records showing payments from Victor. "You've been watching me this whole time?" "I had to stay away until I had enough evidence to protect you. If I'd come back sooner, they would have destroyed you to get to me." Eleanor hugged her father tight. "You sacrificed being in my life to save it." Then Eleanor's mind started working. She studied the evidence, seeing connections. "Wait, this recording. Victor mentions Stone properties. He knew you were alive. He married me to get access to you." "Yes, but he didn't know Stone and Hart were the same person." Eleanor's grief transformed into anger. "He used me from the very beginning." She stood carefully, hand on her belly. "No more running. No more crying. It's time to destroy them." Over the next hours, they assembled allies. Detective Sarah Morrison arrived first. "I've been building my own case against Captain Hale," Sarah said. "Internal affairs is already involved. 3 years of corruption documentation." "When this goes down, will you be there?" Eleanor asked. "Absolutely. This is my career case." David Brennan appeared next, Victor's business partner. Eleanor tensed. "I'm sorry I didn't warn you about the affair," David said. "But I'm here now. Victor's been embezzling from our company. I have everything. Board meetings, forged signatures, illegal transfers. I'm testifying against him." Finally, they made the call. Eleanor's hand shook as she dialed Victor. "Eleanor, ready to sign?" "Yes," Eleanor said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll sign everything. I just want this over." Victor sounded surprised. Finally seeing reason. "Good. Meet me at Frostfall Estate tomorrow at noon." "Where it all started." "Fine, bring your lawyer. We'll make it official." Eleanor hung up and looked at her assembled team. James, Katie, Detective Morrison, Marcus, David. "Tomorrow," she said quietly, "we end this." That night, back in her hospital bed with the baby's heartbeat steady, Eleanor stared at the ceiling. She was terrified. What if the plan failed? What if Victor's connections were too strong? What if she lost everything anyway? But then she felt her baby kick. Strong, determined, fighting. "Okay, little one," Eleanor whispered. "Mama's going to fight too." For the first time in weeks, Eleanor slept without nightmares. Tomorrow would bring either complete victory or total destruction. But at least she wouldn't face it alone. Her father had returned, and the Hales were about to learn what it meant to hurt a heart. The morning of the confrontation, Eleanor stood in front of her hospital mirror. She'd been discharged an hour earlier against Dr. Cho. Foster's strong recommendation, but Eleanor had insisted. This needed to end. Today. Katie helped her into a white dress, symbolic, deliberate. White for purity, innocence, truth. A stark contrast to the blood-red gown Sabrina had worn. You look like an avenging angel, Katie said softly. Good, Eleanor replied. That's what I want to be. James drove Eleanor to Frostfall Estate. Marcus and his security team were already in position, cameras hidden throughout the ballroom. Detective Morrison and her officers waited in unmarked vans down the road. Are you sure you want to do this? James asked as they pulled up to the mansion. I can handle this without you. No, Eleanor's voice was firm. I need to face them. I need them to see that they didn't break me. They entered through a side door. Marcus led them to the grand ballroom, the same room where Eleanor had been humiliated just days earlier. Eleanor walked to the exact spot where Sabrina had thrown the wine. She stood there, hand on her belly, and waited. Victor arrived first with his lawyers. He stopped short when he saw Eleanor standing in the center of the ballroom, bathed in morning light from the tall windows. Smart choice, he said, walking toward her. This will be quick. Sign here, here, and here. Custody to me. You get $50,000 and disappear. Patricia entered next, her expression satisfied. Finally showing some sense, dear. Then Sabrina, smirking. I'll raise your baby well, Eleanor. Better than you ever could. Eleanor watched them assemble, Victor in his expensive suit, Patricia with her cold eyes, Sabrina with her cruel smile, all so confident, all so sure they'd won. Before I sign, Eleanor said quietly, I have a question. Victor sighed impatiently. What? Why did you really marry me? Does it matter? Just sign. It matters to me. Did you ever love me? Long pause, then Victor shrugged. No, I thought you had money. Turns out you were worthless. Patricia laughed. Sabrina added, told you. One more question. Eleanor's voice was steady now. Do you know who Alexander Stone is? Victor frowned. Real estate mogul. What does that have to do with anything? Eleanor smiled. Because Alexander Stone is my father. The color drained from Victor's face. What? James Hart. Alexander Stone. Same person. The man whose buildings you rent. Whose real estate empire you depend on. Eleanor's smile widened. My father. You're lying. Clang. Every exit locked simultaneously. Heavy deadbolts sliding into place. Victor spun around. What's happening? Lights came up. Marcus and his security team at every exit. Then the main doors opened. Detective Sarah Morrison entered with 12 uniformed officers. What is this? Victor demanded. This is private property. Actually, Eleanor said calmly, it's my father's property, and you're trespassing. Detective Morrison approached. Victor Hale, you're under arrest for embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted custody fraud, and emotional abuse. You have no proof. David Brennan turned state as evidence. We have everything. Bank records, forged documents, recorded conversations. Sarah nodded to the officers. Cuff him. Victor looked wildly at David, who stepped out from the side room. You backstabbing? You made it easy, David said. You're sloppy when you're arrogant. As officers cuffed Victor, Sarah turned to Sabrina. Sabrina Voss, you're under arrest for assault causing bodily harm to a pregnant woman. She played video on a tablet, the parking lot attack in crystal clear HD, Sabrina pushing Eleanor with deliberate force. That was an accident! Sabrina's voice rose to a shriek. She fell! Video shows premeditated assault, two-handed push. Sarah nodded to her officers. Take her. Victor, Victor, help me, Sabrina screamed as she was cuffed. But Victor looked away. Finally, Sarah approached Patricia. Patricia Hale, you're under arrest for conspiracy, bribery of a police official, and attempted obstruction of justice. She played an audio recording. Patricia and Captain Gerald discussing payments, planning Eleanor's destruction. Patricia's face cycled through shock and rage. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Actually, I do. You're just another rich woman who thought she was above the law, Sarah gestured. Take her away. More officers entered, leading Captain Gerald Hale in handcuffs. I'm sorry, nephew, he said to Victor. Internal Affairs has been investigating for months. It's over. Victor's face crumbled as he watched his empire collapse. Uncle Gerald, you were supposed to protect us. I protected you for 5 years, but this? Gerald shook his head. You went too far. Victor turned to Eleanor one last time, desperate. Eleanor, please, I'm sorry. I loved you. This was all a misunderstanding. Eleanor walked slowly toward him until they were inches apart. She looked into his eyes and saw nothing worth saving. Love doesn't push, she said quietly but firmly. Love doesn't humiliate. Love doesn't destroy. You never loved me. You saw a target, a means to an end, but you forgot one thing. She stepped back. I'm James Hart's daughter, and we don't break. We rebuild. Eleanor turned to Sabrina. You attacked me in a parking lot. My child almost died. To Patricia, you called me an incubator. You tried to steal my baby. Back to Victor. You broke my heart, but you couldn't break my spirit. And now you're going to lose everything. Victor was led away, shouting threats and promises. Sabrina screamed and cried. Patricia walked in furious silence. James stepped from the shadows. Victor saw him in recognition, finally hit. You were at the party. I've been watching, waiting, collecting evidence. James's voice was cold. And now, justice comes. They were led outside where media cameras captured everything. The fall of the Hale family, recorded for posterity. Eleanor watched from the window as police cars drove away. Katie appeared beside her. You did it, Elle. We did it, Eleanor corrected. I couldn't have done this alone. Her phone buzzed. Dr. Foster. Eleanor, you need to come back to the hospital. Your blood pressure is elevated. The baby... I'm on my way, Eleanor said. She looked at her father. It's done. Can we go now? It's done, James confirmed. Let's get you somewhere safe. As they left Frostfall Estate for the last time, snow began to fall again. But this time it didn't feel ominous. It felt like a cleansing, like the world washing itself clean of the Hale's corruption. Eleanor placed both hands on her belly. We made it, baby. It's over. You're safe now. But there was still the trial to come, and Eleanor was determined to stand up in court and tell her story. To make sure everyone knew exactly what the Hales had done. Justice was coming, and Eleanor would be there to watch them fall. 3 months later, Eleanor sat in the courtroom, 39 weeks pregnant and ready to deliver any day. She'd refused to have the baby before the trial concluded. She wanted to see this through. James sat on one side, Katie on the other. The courtroom was packed with media and spectators. This trial had captivated the nation. The corrupt elite family brought down by the daughter they tried to destroy. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. Video of the wine attack played on large screens. The parking lot assault shown from multiple angles. Financial records detailing Victor's embezzlement and Patricia's bribes. Medical testimony from Dr. Foster about Eleanor's stress-induced complications. Character witnesses testified. Katie described Eleanor's strength. David explained Victor's criminal behavior. Eleanor's former students sent letters describing her kindness. But the most powerful moment came when Eleanor took the stand. Mrs. Hart, the prosecutor said gently, please tell the court about your marriage to Victor Hale. Eleanor took a breath and began. She told them everything. How Victor had married her thinking she was wealthy. His rage when he discovered she had nothing. The emotional abuse. The affair. The threats. For 6 months he made me feel worthless, Eleanor said, her voice steady. His mistress physically attacked me. His mother tried to steal my child. And they did it all believing I had no power to fight back. Why didn't you leave earlier? Because I had no money, no support system except one friend. And Victor threatened that if I left, he'd take my baby. His lawyers versus my teacher salary, I believed him. I believed I'd lose. The courtroom was silent. Several jurors were crying. Judge Harrison, the same judge who dismissed Victor's initial custody petition, asked, Mrs. Hart, would you like to make a victim impact statement? Eleanor stood, turning to face Victor, Sabrina, and Patricia, sitting at the defense table. You tried to break me, Eleanor said. Her voice carried through the courtroom. You humiliated me at a Christmas party in front of hundreds of people. You froze my bank accounts. You got me fired from my job. You tried to take my child. You attacked me when I was pregnant. But here's what you didn't count on. I'm stronger than you ever imagined. I survived losing my father. I survived poverty. I survived you. And now I'm bringing a child into a world where you can never hurt us again. Victor couldn't look at her. Sabrina was openly weeping. Patricia's face was carved from stone. The verdicts came after 2 hours of deliberation. In the case of Sabrina Voss, Judge Harrison read, the court finds the defendant guilty of assault causing bodily harm. Sentence, 4 years in state prison, $250,000 in restitution, permanent restraining order. Sabrina collapsed into sobs. In the case of Patricia Hale, the court finds the defendant guilty of conspiracy, bribery of a public official, and attempted custody fraud. Sentence, 5 years in state prison, $500,000 fine. Patricia's face finally cracked, showing fear. In the case of Victor Hale, the court finds the defendant guilty of embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, emotional abuse, and attempted custody fraud. Sentence, 10 years in state prison, $4.2 million in restitution, plus additional damages. Victor stood, his face red with rage. This is wrong. She's lying. All of them, you're lying. Mr. Hale, sit down or you'll be held in contempt. Victor made one last, desperate look at Eleanor. Eleanor, please. Eleanor turned away. She was done with Victor Hale. They were led away in handcuffs. Media cameras captured every moment. The Hale family's fall was complete. Outside, snow fell gently. Eleanor, James, and Katie walked to James's car. It's finally over, Katie said. Not yet, Eleanor said. I still have to have a baby. James laughed, the first truly happy sound Eleanor had heard from him. Let's get you home, sweetheart. Your ordeal is done. 4 weeks later, on a bright January morning, Eleanor went into labor. The delivery room was filled with people who loved her. James held one hand, Katie held the other. Dr. Foster coached her through contractions. One more push, Eleanor. You're doing so well. I can't, Eleanor gasped. Yes, you can, James said firmly. You're the strongest person I know. Push, Dr. Foster commanded. Eleanor pushed with everything she had left. And then, a baby's cry filled the room. It's a girl, Swanin, Foster announced, placing the baby on Eleanor's chest. Eleanor looked down at her daughter, perfect, tiny, beautiful, and burst into tears. Hi, baby. Hi. I'm your mama. The baby stopped crying and looked up at Eleanor with dark blue eyes. You're perfect, Eleanor whispered. You're so perfect. James was crying too. She looks just like you did when you were born. Dad, what should I name her? James thought for a moment. What about Grace, for the grace that brought us all through this? Grace Alexandria Hart. Eleanor kissed her daughter's forehead, after her grandfather. Baby Grace yawned and fell asleep on her mother's chest, safe and loved. 6 months later, Eleanor lived in a bright, spacious townhouse that James had bought for her. The nursery was painted with woodland animals, Eleanor's own artwork covering the walls. Grace was healthy, happy, and thriving. Eleanor taught online art classes from home, slowly rebuilding her career. The doorbell rang. David Brennan stood there with flowers and a baby gift. Hi, he said shyly. I hope it's okay I stopped by, Mish. I wanted to meet Grace. Of course, come in. David met Grace, who grabbed his finger and wouldn't let go. He laughed. She's beautiful, Eleanor, just like her mom. Thank you for everything. You didn't have to testify against Victor. Yes, I did. It was the right thing. He paused. Eleanor, I know it's too soon, but maybe sometime we could get coffee, just as friends? Eleanor considered. David had proven himself trustworthy. He'd risked his career to help her. And when she looked at him, she didn't see Victor's cruelty or manipulation. She saw a good man. Maybe, she said with a small smile. In time. I can wait, David said. 1 year later, Christmas arrived again. But this time, Eleanor celebrated in her own home with her chosen family. James played with Grace, who was taking wobbly first steps. Katie brought gifts. And David, who'd become a regular presence in their lives, arrived with dinner. Eleanor hung an ornament on her tree, a photo of her, Grace and James all smiling. Grace toddled over. Mama! Eleanor scooped her up. What is it, sweet pea? Grace pointed at the Christmas lights. Pretty. Yes, baby. Pretty lights. Eleanor looked around at her father, her best friend, a good man who was patiently waiting for her to be ready. She looked at her beautiful daughter and her cozy home and her slowly rebuilding life. Katie raised a glass. To family, the one we're born with and the one we choose. Everyone toasted. Eleanor held Grace close and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. Eleanor's memoir, The Wine and the Rise, One Woman's Journey from Victim to Victor, became a bestseller. She used the proceeds to establish the Grace Foundation with her father, providing legal aid and support to pregnant women facing abuse. Victor served 8 years before parole. He never attempted contact with Eleanor or Grace. Sabrina's influencer career ended. She completed court-mandated therapy and now works in retail, largely anonymous. Patricia was disowned by the Hale family. She lived on a fixed income in a studio apartment, her social standing completely destroyed. Captain Gerald lost his pension and served 5 years. The police department underwent major corruption reforms. Eleanor and David married 2 years after the trial. Grace gained a baby brother, James Alexander Brennan Jr. When reporters asked Eleanor if she forgave them, she replied, "Forgiveness is for me, not them. I chose to heal. I chose to build something beautiful from the ashes they left behind. And I chose to make sure no other woman faces what I faced alone." Eleanor Hart had survived betrayal, public humiliation, and an attempt to steal her child. She'd found her father, her strength, and her voice. And every Christmas, she looked at her family, the real one, the chosen one, and remembered that wine attack that had shattered her world. That attack had destroyed Eleanor Hart, but from those ashes, someone stronger had risen. Someone who knew her worth. Someone who would never again let anyone make her feel less than whole. Grace toddled over and hugged Eleanor's leg. Love you, Mama. Eleanor picked up her daughter and held her close. Love you too, baby. Forever and always. Outside, snow fell gently over the city, but inside Eleanor's home, there was only warmth, laughter, and the kind of love that heals all wounds. 3 years later, Eleanor stood at a podium in a crowded conference hall, 8 months pregnant with her third child. Grace, now 4, sat in the front row next to James Jr., age 2. David held the toddler while James kept Grace entertained. Thank you all for coming to the 3rd annual Grace Foundation Gala, Eleanor said into the microphone. 3 years ago, I stood in a very different ballroom. I was alone, humiliated, and convinced I had no power to fight back against the people hurting me. She paused, looking at the audience of donors, survivors, and supporters. But I was wrong. I had power I didn't know existed. The power of a father's love that never wavered. The power of a friend who refused to let me give up. The power of good people who chose to do the right thing, even when it cost them. Eleanor placed a hand on her belly. This foundation has helped 237 women in 3 years. We've provided legal aid, safe housing, counseling, and job placement. We've won 112 custody cases, and we've sent 14 abusers to prison. Applause erupted. Eleanor smiled, feeling her baby kick. They tried to destroy me at a Christmas party. They failed. Not because I was strong, I wasn't. Not because I was brave, I was terrified. They failed because I wasn't alone. And now none of you are alone either. She raised her glass. To survivors, to fighters, to everyone who refused to stay broken. You are seen, you are believed, and you are never, ever alone. The applause was deafening. After the gala, Eleanor's family drove home together. Grace chattered about the pretty dresses. James Jr. fell asleep in his car seat. David held Eleanor's hand. You were amazing tonight, and he said, I meant every word. Eleanor looked at her family in the rearview mirror. I used to think surviving was enough, but it's not. Thriving is the goal, and we're thriving. At home, after the children were in bed, Eleanor stood in the nursery she'd painted for her third baby. This one would be a boy. They were naming him William James Brennan. David came up behind her, wrapping his arms gently around her pregnant belly. Do you ever think about them? He asked quietly. Victor, Patricia, Sabrina? Sometimes, Eleanor admitted. Not with anger anymore, just sadness. They had so much, and they destroyed it all for nothing. You're a better person than me. I still want to punch Victor in the face. Eleanor laughed. You're a good man, David Brennan. I'm a lucky man. I get to wake up next to the strongest woman I've ever met. Eleanor turned to face him. I wasn't strong then. I was breaking. But you didn't break. That's what matters. They stood there in the quiet nursery, surrounded by the life Eleanor had built from ruins. A life filled with love and laughter and purpose. Her phone buzzed. A text from Katie. Stop being romantic and go to bed. You're pregnant and need rest. Eleanor laughed. Katie always knew. As she climbed into bed beside David, Eleanor thought about the woman she'd been 4 years ago. That scared, isolated, broken woman standing in a wine-stained dress, believing she had nothing. If she could go back and tell that woman one thing, it would be this: you're stronger than you know. You're loved more than you realize. And this darkness you're in, it's temporary. Light is coming. Hold on just a little longer. Eleanor placed both hands on her belly, feeling William kick. Good night, little one, she whispered. You're coming into a world where Mama is happy, Daddy is good, and your big sister and brother can't wait to meet you. You're safe, you're loved, and that's all that matters. Outside, stars shone over the city. Inside Eleanor's home, a family slept peacefully. The wine had stained her dress that night, but it hadn't stained her soul. Eleanor Hart had survived, and more than that, she had thrived.